Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Steph is so weird. I am Steph. Today we're going to be reading chapter 2 of Curse of the Blue Figurine. It is by John Bellairs. And yesterday we read chapter 1, and it took about 40 minutes and it was about 15 pages. This time it's chapter 2. It's about 7 pages. So I guess we had just a really big, long introduction, and now we're going to just keep going with the story. Okay, here we go. Chapter 2. We're back to Johnny. Johnny, and what's going on with Johnny? Days passed. Weeks passed. Nothing very exciting happened to Johnny. He had the usual things to do, like snow shoveling, dish drying, and homework. Johnny went to St. Michael's School, a Catholic grade school in the town of Dustin Heights. It was a 2-story brick building with a slate roof and a pointed stone arch on the front. At St. Michael's, Johnny was taught by the Sisters of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. They wore navy blue robes with black scalpers and black veils. The 7th grade teacher was Sister Electa. She was nice most of the time, but she really piled the homework on. Not that Johnny had a lot of trouble with homework. He was a real brain, and everybody at St. Michael's School knew it. Most of the other kids didn't mind that Johnny was smart. They thought it was odd, but they didn't hold it against him. But there was one kid who was really jealous of Johnny. The kid was named I.N.C.O.M.E. Eddie was a 7th grader, like Johnny. He lived on a farm outside of town, and as everyone knows, farm work builds up your muscles. Eddie was strong, and he was good looking. He thought that he owned the world, and he was ready to fight any kid who got in his way. Eddie had problems, though. He had not been doing very well in school. His last report card had all been C's and D's, and as a result, he'd gotten a royal chewing out from his father. So Eddie was mad a lot of the time now. He was mad at the world in general, but he was particularly mad at Johnny Dixon. Lately, Johnny had begun to notice the way Eddie felt about him. Standing in line during the lunch hour one day, he had happened to turn around and he saw Eddie scowling at him. And later, Johnny had been standing around on the playground talking to another kid, and Eddie had walked by and kicked him in the shins for no reason at all. And now, whenever Johnny passed Eddie, Eddie would glower and say things like, "I wish I had a brain," or "It must be great to be a brown nose. Is that how you get those good grades, kid? Because you're the biggest brown nose in the school? Is that how you do it?" All this had Johnny worried. He was short, he wore glasses, and he was not very strong. Also, he was he was in a new school, and he had not yet made any close friends. And he had a very great fear of getting beat up. It was one of his really big fears, like his fear that someday he would step on a nail, get an infected puncture wound, and die of lockjaw. Johnny was always reading things in the paper about people who had gotten beaten to a pulp or beaten beyond recognition. That which meant that they had gotten smashed up so badly that no one could tell who they were. Stories like this hit Johnny right in the pit of his stomach, and he wondered often whether someday I.N.C.O.M.E would get it into his head to beat him up. One cold, dark February day, Johnny was standing under the big stone arch out in front of St. Michael's School. The school day was over. Everyone else had gone. As usual, he was the last kid out of the building. He fiddled with his scarf and adjusted his stocking cap on his head. Johnny was a fussy kid. Everything always had to be just so. or it wasn't, or it was no good. Finally, he was ready to go. Johnny peered out of his right. Oh no, there was Eddie. He was standing on the corner talking to some other kid. His back was to Johnny. He hadn't seen him yet, but he would when Johnny came that way, and he had to go that way to get home. Johnny peered quickly around the corner. A narrow alley ran between St. Michael's Church, which stood on the corner, and the school. If he had moved past, Johnny could zip down the alley and get out onto the street in any of these three different ways. But for some reason, Johnny decided that he would duck into the church. He could say a prayer for his mother and hang around till Eddie went away. St. Michael's Church was a tall brick building with a brick steeple on the northeast corner. There was 3 big pointed wooden doors at the front of the church. A flight of worn stone steps led up to each one. Johnny headed for the nearest door. It was a short dash, and he made it easily. Now he was tugging at the heavy iron ring. The big door swung open. Johnny slipped inside, and the door closed behind him. Clump! Johnny heaved a sigh of relief. He had made it. Johnny was standing in the vestibule, was in front. Johnny was standing in the vestibule, which is what the front hall of a church is called. He dipped his fingers in the holy water font, made the sign of the cross, and shoved open one of the inner doors. He was in the main body of the church now. Rows of wooden pews stretched away before him. Overhead arced the high vaulted ceiling. It was painted midnight blue and was powdered with little gold stars. At the far end of the nave was the communion rail, and beyond it was the altar and the massive carved altarpiece. Johnny liked the old church. It was vast and gloomy and smelled of incense and candle wax. He loved the flickering red sanctuary lamp and the strange pictures on the stained glass windows. The church was a place where he often went just to sit and get away from the world. Johnny walked down the main aisle. His footsteps, though soft, seemed to echo from the high ceiling. When he got to the broad, polished steps that led up to the communion rail, Johnny stopped. With his arms folded over his chest, he glanced up admiringly at the altarpiece that the mysterious Mr. Nemo had carved. It was quite a production. Over the altar table rose a 3-decker wooden screen with lots of pointed niches in it. Each niche had an elaborately carved hood, and in the niches were wooden statues. The statues were painted all different colors, and gold paint had just been used lavishly. The statues in the lower 2 levels were of saints. There were St. Peter and St. Paul and St. Catherine and St. Ursula, and some nameless saints with swords and palms in their hands. At the top of the screen, there were only 3 statues. These 3 were angels. One held a trumpet, one held a sword and a shield, and one held a golden censer on a chain. Johnny went on staring at the altar screen for a while. Then he went over to the iron vigilite rack that stood near the confessional. He lit a candle for his mother, and then he walked down the side aisle and out into the vestibule again. Cautiously, Johnny pushed the main door of the church open. He didn't open it far, just a crack. Darn! Eddie was still there. Johnny let the door fall softly shut. Now what was he going to do? Or now what was he going to do? Grandma would be expecting him. He couldn't stay here forever. There was a back way out, but you had to go up into the sanctuary and out through the sacristy. I thought I looked up all the words. There was a back way out, but you had to go up into the sanctuary and out through the sacristy to get to it. and only Father Higgins and the altar boys and the sisters were allowed to go out that way. If Father Higgins caught him going through the sacristy, he would have a fit. Sacristy. Johnny stood, pondering, in the dark vestibule. He felt frustrated. He felt trapped. Then, suddenly, he had a very strange and interesting idea. He would go have a quick look in the basement. Johnny grinned. He was a well-behaved kid most of the time, but he wasn't all that well-behaved. Like most kids, he enjoyed poking around in places that were forbidden, and he knew he was alone. There wasn't anybody in the church but him. Now was the time. Quickly, Johnny walked down to the far end of the vestibule. Now he was standing under the belfry. Overhead was a wooden ceiling with holes in it. The bell ropes hung through the holes. There was the dark, varnished wood staircase that led up to the choir loft, and under the staircase, set in a paneled wall, was a narrow door with a black china knob. It led down to the basement. Johnny paused. He was thinking about the ghost of Father Bart. What if he appeared now? Or what if he suddenly materialized in the dark basement? Johnny shrugged and forced himself to smile. Hadn't Grandpa told him that the professor's story was really a lot of hooey? Sure, there was nothing to worry about. Johnny put his hand on the knob. He twisted, and the door opened easily. Mr. Famagusha, the janitor, was supposed to keep this door locked. But, as Johnny well knew, Mr. Famagusha was a rather careless man. Johnny put his foot on the first step, and then he pulled it back. He needed something. Ah, there it was, the flashlight. Johnny heard Mr. Famagusha said that there was no electric light in the church basement. And sure enough, on a little dusty ledge near the door was a small and rather battered flashlight. Johnny picked it up, snapped it on, and started down. The flight of creaky steps turned once at a wooden landing and went on down to a hard-packed dirt floor. Johnny played the flashlight beam around. Some rickety shelves had been built into the wall underneath the steps. He saw a silver censer that was so tarnished that it looked black. A grimly cobweb box that said, Ad altere dea incense. A headless plaster statue of some saint. A glass tumbler full of cassock buttons. A pipe wrench and a section of brass pipe, left, no doubt, by the careless Mr. Famagusha. Johnny played the beam back into the darkness of the basement. He saw the brick pillars that held up the floor of the church. Beyond the first row of pillars was a stack of tabletops. Leaning against the stack was a rifle wheel, the kind that used for the turkey. I said rifle. Leaning against the stack was a raffle wheel, the kind they use for the turkey raffles at Thanksgiving time. And in the shadowy distance, he could see the big, sooty iron furnace that heated the church in the wintertime. Johnny sighed. The whole place was a lot less interesting than he had hoped it would be. He pointed the beam of the flashlight here and there. Without much interest, he noticed a bookcase with warped, sagging shelves. The top shelf was empty, but the second shelf held a row of thick, black volumes. Johnny reached for one of the books, but he jerked his hand away with a disgusted cry. The book was crawling with little gray spiders. Johnny closed his eyes and shuddered. He couldn't help it. He hated spiders, and the small gray ones were, to him, the most disgusting of all. A bad taste rose into Johnny's mouth, but he swallowed, and it went away. Johnny opened his eyes. He shone the flashlight at the book again. The spiders were gone. Well, now that was odd. Where had they gone to? Johnny looked at the floor. Nothing there. Then he pointed the flashlight at the wall behind the bookcase. It was a brick wall, and it was in pretty bad shape. The mortar looked powdery and loose, and the bricks were crumbling. In one place, the mortar between two bricks had fallen out, and there was a hole. Maybe that was where the spiders had gone. Johnny went back to looking at the row of books. For some reason, he was interested in the book that had the spiders on it. He wanted to take it out and look at it. 3 times he reached out his hand to touch it, and 3 times he jerked his hand back at the last minute. Finally, on the 4th try, his hand closed over the end of the grimy book. He pulled it out quickly and stepped back. Now he carried the book over to the stairs and laid it down on one of the lower steps. Johnny played the flashlight over the cover of the book. The faint gold letters said, Roman Mismal. Now Johnny reached out in a gingerly way and took hold of the dear dog-eared cover. With a quick motion, he flipped it back, and then he gasped. The inside of the book had been hollowed out. Only the outer part of each page was left. And in the hole that had been made were 2 things. A small rolled-up piece of yellowish paper tied with a faded red ribbon, and a strange little blue ceramic statue. The statue was shaped like an Egyptian mummy case. It had staring eyes and a tiny beaked nose and a smiling mouth and a scrolled goatee. The figure's arms were crossed over its breast in the Egyptian style. Apparently, the mummy was supposed to be the mummy of a pharaoh because it held in its hands the crook and the flail, the symbols of kingly power in ancient Egypt. Johnny was utterly amazed. With the flashlight held steady in his left hand, he reached into the hollow book with his right hand. He did this very cautiously, as if he had expected something to bite him. But nothing did. He pulled out the little paper scroll and yanked at the bottom at the rotten ribbon, which was tied in a bow knot. The ribbon came off, and Johnny held the paper up to the light. It had been rolled up for so long that it was permanently curled. Nevertheless, Johnny could read the shaded, heavy, masculine script. Whoever removes these things from the church does so at his own peril. I adjure you by the living God not to endanger your mortal soul. Vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. Remigius Bart. Yay! And that's the end of chapter 2. So basically, he didn't want to get beaten up and ran into the church. And he was still there. So he had to go back. I still had some trouble with a couple of these words. Man. That's funny. What happened with the gray spiders? Where did they go? Why do they keep showing up and then disappearing like that? What does Roman missile mean? It's M-I-S-S-A-L. Yeah. And then Remigius Bart, I looked it up. It's German. So you break it up, Remigius. So, yeah. Well, that was fun. So now things are happening. He's found me. Maybe that's the blue figurine. So, thank you for being here today. It's been almost 20 minutes, and tomorrow we will jump into chapter 3 as more Johnny stuff happens. More stuff happens to Johnny. Thanks for being here. Have a lovely day. And this has been Steph. Like and subscribe if you like all this, and I'll see you next time. Bye.